Welcome to Behind the Book. It's time now for Behind the Book, hosted by Tess Thompson and Karen McQuestion, two authors with a passion for books, no filters, and limitless curiosity. Join them now to find out the real story behind your favorite books and authors. And now, Behind the Book.
I'm here with my co-host Karen. Welcome to Behind the Book. Karen, how are you doing? Anything new and exciting in your world?
Well, I'm kind of excited about the interview we did with Boyd Morrison. And I'll tell you, when I was reading his bio prior to us talking to him, I was so intimidated. I was like, he's smart. He's an excellent writer. He's accomplished. He's an engineer. He's sort of a genius guy. And I was like, you know what? And then he turns out to be super nice too.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like,
and
okay,
very down to earth. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. His all his patents and everything, and then his hobbies, car racing and all these things. I was like, okay, this guy is way too cool for me.
Well, you know, one of the things he said, he mentioned he wanted to know what it was like to go, I think it was 150 miles an hour. So he went to Germany and he actually did that on the Autobahn. And for those listeners that don't know, there is not a speed limit on the Autobahn in Germany. And I know this because I was there. I don't have a lot of great stories, but when I was a teenager, I went to Germany with a school group. So it was my German teacher took a bunch of us students. I saved up my babysitting money and I worked in a department store. It saved up all my money, went to Germany. We stayed with families that hosted us. And it was an incredible trip, especially for someone who lived in the suburbs of Wisconsin, hadn't traveled too much. But one day they gave us a free day just to do whatever we wanted. And my friend Betty, who she had an old lady name even back then. That was her actual name, Betty. It was not short for Elizabeth. So and we're still friends. But Betty and I decided to start walking. I think we walked 10 miles or something. And then we were supposed to be back to the group for dinner. And we were panic stricken. But we had noticed during the trip that everybody was hitchhiking, like 8-year-old kids and old grandmas. And she's like, why don't we stick our thumbs out and see if, we can get someone to pick us up. Well, I was 17, Betty was 16. It seemed like a really good idea. So sure enough, A guy pulls over and is like, where are you going? And, we didn't speak fluent German. We were conversational and we could conversate. I just made up a new word. We could conversate in German, but we could not, carry on. So we get in the back seat of his car and he hops on the Autobahn and we looked at each other like we are going to die. He was going so fast. And we just looked at each other. And I think it just occurred to both of us at that moment that he could be taking us anywhere. I mean, and we didn't have cell phones. That was before cell phones. Nobody knew where we were. But he turned out to be just a really nice German guy, dropped us off where we got off the Autobahn and dropped us off like a block from where we were supposed to be. We were like, no, you don't have to go all the way. Right here is good because we didn't want our chaperones to know we got in a car with a strange man.
Well, it sounds like he was perfectly nice, but a very fast driver. So I don't know if I approve.
Well, he got us there when we were supposed to get there. And I don't think he drove any faster than he normally would. But we watched the dial go up because that's how it used to be, is that dial was like going higher and higher. And we were like, holy mackerel. We could not believe how fast he was going. I haven't thought about that for a long time. But when Boyd mentioned the Autobahn, I was like, oh, he did that on purpose? He actually went to Germany to drive that fast?
That is quite a story, though. That's a good one, Karen, to tell your kids or at least reminisce with Betty.
Yes, just Betty. My kids have never heard this story. I don't think my husband's ever heard this story.
Isn't it funny how you think of things every once in a while that you haven't thought of in years and years?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So.
Did you ever hitchhike?
Oh, God, no. First of all, I'm terrified of everything. So there's no way that I would ever hitchhike. But I do remember being a kid in the 70s in a rural area. And there were tons of hitchhikers all the time. And, like kind of the hippie type. And my mom would always say, never ever pick up a hitchhiker and never ever hitchhike because, it's a sure way to get murdered, either way. And so that always stuck with me.
You listened to your mother. You were a good daughter.
Yes, that's right.
Hello, everybody. Today, we're excited to have Boyd Morrison with us. Boyd is a #1 New York Times bestselling author, actor, engineer, and Jeopardy champion. He started his career working on NASA's space station project at Johnson Space Center, where he got the opportunity to fly on the Vomit Comet, the same plane used to train astronauts for zero gravity. But I understand he did not vomit.
Did not.
After earning a PhD in engineering from Virginia Tech, he used his training to develop 16 U.S. patents at Thomson RCA. Boyd then managed a video game testing group in Microsoft's Xbox division before becoming a full-time writer. For nonfiction thrills, he enjoys whitewater rafting, skiing, scuba diving, and bungee jumping. Boyd is also a professional actor appearing in films, commercials, and stage plays. And did we mention that he was a Jeopardy champion? That is very cool. He currently lives in Seattle with his wife. Thank you so much for joining us today, Boyd.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
You are actually someone I've wanted to talk to since 2009. So it took a while, but we finally connected.
Yes, yeah. I remember corresponding with you way back in the early days of self-publishing. It was you, me, and about 4 other people who were doing it at that time. We were blazing the trail.
Actually, leads right into our first question. So that's perfect. We always ask guests about the road to becoming a novelist. And I understand in your case, an agreement with your wife played a role in that story.
Yes, that began quite a while ago. I was an engineer at the time, and I had written one novel called The Catalyst, and I finished it while I was getting my PhD, and I finished the book after I got my degree and sent it out to, I think, 4 agents, and I got some nice rejections, but nothing came of it, and I didn't really try after that. And it was around that time that my wife decided she wanted to go to med school, but she had an English degree in college, so she needed to take all her pre-med courses. So we made a deal that I would support her in my job while she spent 9 years doing her pre-med, med school, and residency. And then when she became a full-fledged doctor, I would get to quit my job and have the same 9 years to become a published author. Luckily, she liked my first book enough that she thought I might be able to do this for a living. And she even was kind of perturbed that I didn't try harder to get that first book published. And she told me at the time, this book will be published someday. I will make sure that happens. And I thought, oh, okay, whatever. And so sure enough, when she became a full-fledged doctor in 2005, I quit my job at Microsoft and started writing full-time and wrote 2 more novels before I got published. The 3rd novel was the first one I got published in 2010. That was called The Ark. And she was right, as usual. The first book I ever wrote got published, and now it's in multiple languages. It was quite a journey. I looked at it as an investment in her career so that I could do my career.
Did that add pressure to you, knowing that you had this time frame?
Well, 9 years is a pretty good time frame. I figured if I can't do it in 9 years, it's probably not going to happen.
Oh, that's funny. All right. Well,
So it took
if someone
5
asks,
years. It took 5 years.
well, 5 isn't bad. I mean, people have had long journeys to this
Sure.
in this career for sure. So if someone asks what kind of books you write, what's your response?
I say I write adventure thrillers. They're action-packed, really fast-paced, and I say if you like things like Mission Impossible or Indiana Jones, you'll probably like the kind of books I write.
I'd say that's accurate. I remember when your first book, The Ark, came out, some reviewers said it's sort of like the Da Vinci Code, but I thought yours was a little more action oriented.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I would say probably it has the historical background of an Indiana Jones, but in a modern setting. And often I say that the main character in that series is named Tyler Locke, and he was an engineer. And so what I say is that I created him because I wanted to do for engineers what Indiana Jones did for archaeologists, which was make them cool, heroic figures.
Yeah, they needed that, definitely.
Yeah.
I'm married to an engineer.
Hero engineers out there.
Yeah. Well, Karen and I are both married to hero engineers, so we appreciate your efforts on their behalf. But I'm curious about something.
I was an engineer, which is why I wanted to do that.
Right. I'm curious. So you have obviously, kind of several jobs, one of which is an actor. I'm curious why you didn't go the screenplay route rather than the novel.
That is a good question. And the main reason is I wanted to have total control over my manuscript. With screenplays, there are many successful screenwriters who have had nothing actually produced. And if they do get it produced, it's often very different from the vision they had for their screenplay. And so if you look at movies that have come out, if you look at the original screenplay, I just watched something about it's on Netflix called The Movies That Made Us, and it was about Pretty Woman. And the original script for Pretty Woman was this dark, gritty tale called 3000, and it wasn't a comedy, and so they totally changed it as they were producing the film, and the director came in, and the actors had their own stamp put on it. And so it would have been very disappointing to me to write screenplays that I thought were really fun and good that didn't ever actually see the light of day. And so with a book, the good thing is that when I write the book, it's my product. And when I see it in a bookstore, I know that I'm the one responsible for every word in the story. Often people ask me if is there going to be a movie made of one of your books, or has there been a movie made? And some writers I know are tentative about doing that. And some people say, yeah, I would love to have a movie made. That's more like me. I would love to have a movie made. But if the movie comes out, it's going to be different from my book. It has to be. Or if it's a TV series. Now, a lot of books are being made into streaming series. And I will always say, look, the movie is great or it's not great, but the book is still there. It doesn't change what the book is. And so if you like the movie, you'll probably like the book. If you didn't like the movie, hey, go read the book. It's very different.
That's true.
Total win-win. So with the different various jobs you've had and you have some really active hobbies, how does that play into your writing? Does one feed the other? You get ideas from your past work?
Absolutely. I worked at NASA for a couple of years on the Johnson Space Center on the Space Station Freedom Project. And as part of my job, I got to fly several times on the Vomit Comet, which is the plane they use to train astronauts for zero gravity. And it's this KC-135 cargo plane that the entire fuselage is hollowed out, and they can put different kinds of experiments in there. And it flies in a parabola between 20,000 and 40,000 feet. And it does that 40 times in a row. And you get about 25 seconds of weightlessness on every parabola. And they certainly call it the Vomit Comet for a reason, because even though we get a patch that we get to put on our neck that has drugs of scopolamine, dexedrine as an anti-nausea drug, I would say 50% of the people who fly on the plane actually end up getting sick. So everybody in their flight suits has air sick bags sticking out of all the pockets just in case, because you don't want to get sick in zero gravity, that's for sure. And so it was a really fun experience. And as I said, I never vomited, which I was very proud of. I thought that experience would someday, if I wrote a book, I've got to use that somehow. Sure enough, I wrote a book called The Roswell Conspiracy, and I was very excited because I got to put a scene in there in a space plane where there's a zero gravity fight in the book. And I just took that from my own knowledge because I have actually been in zero gravity. And so I could choreograph the entire scene very realistically because I've had that experience myself. And a lot of times if I don't have an experience that's useful, I will go and get it. So for example, in the book, The Vault, I have a chase on the Autobahn between a Ferrari and a Lamborghini. And I wanted to see what it was like to drive at high speed on the Autobahn. So I actually went to Munich, rented a car, and took it out on the Autobahn at 150 miles an hour. Now, unfortunately, it wasn't a Ferrari, it was an Audi station wagon, but still, going 150 miles an hour in any car is an eye-opening experience. I don't think I blinked once while I was going that speed, but it gave me a sense for what it's like to drive that fast, so that when I was writing the book, I knew what I was talking about. And so I've done a lot of things. I've done jet boat rides. I've gone to the gun range and shot many different types of guns, including things on full automatic like Uzis and AK-47s, just so I know when I'm writing these gunfights what it sounds like, what it smells like, what it feels like, and all the things you need to worry about, like guns jamming. That's happened to me. I was shooting an MP5 on full auto, and the shell casing gets ejected out of the weapon. And one time it hit the wall next to me and landed right inside my safety goggles and kind of burned my face. And it never would have occurred to me that could happen. But now I might work that into a story at some point, because it was very distracting to have that happen. And when you're in a gunfight, I can see how that might impact the direction of the scene. So I love getting those kinds of experiences and then putting them into the book. Certainly there's things I can't do, but for the most part, I like to give as much realism to them as possible.
Well, your research is a lot more fun than my research. Much more exciting.
Well, you've co-written a number of books for the legendary author Clive Cussler, who sadly passed away last year. How did that partnership come about?
I had just finished my fourth book in the Tyler Locke series, and I was trying to think about what I wanted to do next. And all of a sudden, my agent called out of the blue and said, "Hey, what would you think about writing a book with Clive Cussler?" And I said, "Oh, the guy that I've been reading for the last 35 years and who has totally influenced my career in many ways? That would be fun." And she said, "Okay, he's going to call you in 2 minutes." And I stepped back and she hung up, and I stepped back and thought, okay, this is crazy. And then sure enough, 2 minutes later, Clive called. And he goes, "Hey, Boyd, I read a couple of your books and I loved them, and I loved how you do the endings, and wanted to see if you wanted to come write the Oregon Files with me." And I said, "That would be great." And he said, "Okay, we're going to fly you down to my house in a couple of weeks and we'll get started." And that was literally the extent of the conversation. And then 2 weeks later, I fly down to his house in Phoenix, and I'm sitting in his office brainstorming with Clive Cussler about our first book together. And it was a very surreal experience.
I can only imagine. So then how did the process of co-writing work? Did you alternate chapters, or did you do it together, or did he outline it?
No. What we did is I would fly down there for 2 or 3 days, and I would stay at his house. He had a lovely guest house there, and we would sit in his office. A lot of it was just staring at the ceiling and wondering what we should come up with. A lot of it was, Clive had written 70 books. So one of the big problems was coming up with something he hadn't done already. And so a lot of times I would think up an idea and I say, what if they're trying to blow up the Panama Canal? And he would say, "Oh no, we're doing that in the Dirk Pitt book right now." Or, and I would continually have that happen. So what we would do, the way we worked is we would brainstorm for a couple of days. We would come up with the general idea behind the book. What are the major locations? Who's the villain? What's the villain after? What's their goal? What are some of the obstacles? Of course, the Oregon Files depends on the ship, the Oregon. So how is the Oregon ship and its crew involved in this caper? And maybe think about what the conclusion will be, how it will wrap up, and maybe think about one or two action set pieces. A lot of times I would come in going, okay, this is something I've always wanted to do. I want a car cargo ship on its side, and I want a big action scene inside the cargo ship while it's on its side and sinking. And then I would work that into the story somehow. And so once we got the main ideas for the story, I would go home and I would either write an outline or I would just write the first 100 pages. And so I would send that to Clive. He would revise it however he saw fit and send it back to me. And then I'd write another 100 pages and so forth and so on until the book was done. And that was pretty much it.
Well, and how long typically did it take to co-write a book with Clive Cussler?
About 9 months, I would say, was our typical time frame.
Is that the same when you write a book on your own?
Yeah, I would say that's a pretty good time frame for writing a novel. My novels are anywhere from 100 to 115,000 words, and so they're not short books.
No, they're not.
They're not Tom Clancy or George R.R. Martin long books, but they're substantial books. So 9 months. And a lot of that time is just spent in plotting it out. When I know what's happening, for instance, my chapters tend to be somewhere between 5 to 8 pages long. And if I know what is happening in a chapter and I know it really and I've spent all that time choreographing the action or thinking about the major plot points and how it all works out in the chapter, I can write it in an hour or two. Once I know all that, it's figuring it out so that I can put it all on the page. That takes all the time. And so sometimes it'll take me a couple of months just planning it out and figuring out the major beats in the story before I can even start writing.
If someone was unfamiliar with your books, which one should they start with?
I would say The Ark, because that's the first in my Tyler Locke series, and it's pretty representative of the kind of stories I write. And so it's pretty accessible, and I still think it's a really fun book. And it's actually about a disease, even though I wrote it it got published in 2010. Unfortunately, it's still fairly topical because it's about a disease that this villain wants to let loose on the world that will effectively reduce the population and usher in a new era that his group can take over.
I noticed, I have a copy of The Ark and I looked through it again just to refresh my memory. And I had recently heard a talk by the author Jerry Jenkins, who talks about starting a book with, a really engrossing, like grab them by the throat right from the start. And that's something you absolutely do. And I like taking mental notes because it's just really, and there's an art to it. It seems effortless when you're reading it, but when you're writing it, it's very much a skill set.
Thank you. Yes, I like to have things start off right from the get-go. I don't like to waste time. And I think that comes from me just being bored with stories. And I want to get to the meat of the story. I heard a good example that James Patterson gave at a writers conference one time, where he said, he gave the example of, okay, so if you're telling this story to a friend of yours and you say, well, I came home and I saw a dead body on my driveway. And so I pulled up to the side, the garage door was open. I remembered I have all the groceries in my car, and I was shopping for a party that we were having. And you go, what about the dead body? Tell me about the dead body. And how did it get there? I don't want to know all that stuff. And so I often think about that. I just want to get to the meat of the story. My books tend to not have a lot of subplots because I'm just all plot. And so when I think if you look at almost any of my stories, there's probably not a chapter you could remove and still have the story make sense, because it's all related to the story. And if you take out anything, it would collapse, because it's all meant to be there and contribute in some way. And so I want to start that from the very beginning to the very end. And I love when people tell me, Boyd, I can't believe it, but I had to stay up till 2 a.m. reading this because I couldn't every time I got to the end of a chapter, I had to read the next one. And now I'm so tired at work, and I curse you for doing that. And I say, thank you. That's exactly what I wanted to do.
Mission accomplished.
Exactly.
So as a writer, what is your process? What does a writing day look like? Do you outline ahead of time? You touched on that a little bit, but if you wouldn't mind getting into more detail.
Yes, I outline not in great detail. I do like to know what's going to happen 5 or 6 chapters ahead of time, so that what I'm writing now, I know what it's leading up to. Otherwise, I am definitely not the pantser type who just sits down at the computer every morning, not knowing what I'm going to write that day. I envy that. I would love that, because then there would be no burden. I would just start writing. And I think Lee Child writes that way. And I can't even fathom doing that, because I have to know where the story is going. So a lot of times I'll build a general outline so I know where the big turning points in the story will happen. I usually know where it's going to lead up to the end. And so a lot of the story is figuring out how they get to each of those points. And I wouldn't say I have a typical writing day. It totally depends what else is going on in my life, when the deadline is, and how in the zone I am. But it's definitely in spurts. I can write 40 pages in a week sometimes, and then none the next week. So it's very haphazard, and you wouldn't believe I could get anything done like that, but that's just what works for me. And I will say to anybody out there listening, do whatever works for you. I hate when I go to a writing seminar or conference and they say, well, you must outline every time. And then I'll go to the very next one and say, you should never outline because that limits you. And I just say, do whatever works. If you love outlining, like Jeffrey Deaver writes 200-page outlines before he ever writes a book, great. If you like writing like Lee Child and not know the next word you're going to type because you're just in the moment, hey, it works for him too. They're both very successful authors. And so you can see that it doesn't matter that they have a very different process for writing. So just explore, try different things. If something's not working, change it up. Whatever delivers an actual book, a finished novel, that's what works for you.
So what parts of writing are the easiest and what are the hardest for you?
Plotting is very hard. I spend a lot of time on that because I want to make sure everything makes sense, that the characters' actions are internally motivated. I spend a lot of time on the why. Why is a character doing something? Because I don't want them to be cardboard figures that are just being moved around to serve the plot. If I want them to do something in a particular scene, but it's not motivated by their what they've done in the past or how I've described them in the past, I'll go back and write that to make it make sense that they get to this point, they make that decision. It feels organic. A lot of times where I get stuck is I want something to happen in the story, but I don't know how I can do that. And so my wife will tell you, I come down a lot of times at 11 p.m. at night and go, this story is stuck. It's never going to work. I don't know why I started this story. And then I'll talk to her for about 45 minutes. She just helps me talk through it. And then finally something will spark and I'll go, oh, but what if they do this? And then I'm bang. Oh, okay, I'm gone. I'm back up on the computer writing that down. And all of a sudden I'm brilliant again. And it can go that quickly from moron to genius in the blink of an eye. And so that's the hard part. And then the part I like is when the book is done, I just I finished a book right at the end of the year last year, and then started editing it. And I really had fun doing the edit, because every time I got to a chapter, it takes 9 months to write a book. So some of the chapters I'm reading I had written months and months before and totally forgot about them. And I was rereading it and going, hey, this is pretty good. This is a lot of fun. I'm liking it, but I know how to change this and I know how to fix that. And so I was having a great time revising it. But I'm definitely one of those writers who likes having written a book. There are some writers, again, who I envy, who say they just love sitting down at the computer every day and just writing the next thing that they're working on. And that's can be torture for me sometimes, because it's just not working. When it does work, that's when you get the endorphins and you go, oh yeah, this is what I wanted. But then when I get to the end of the book, I rarely get to the end of the book and go, I don't know if I ever have, because I wouldn't get to the end of the book if I didn't feel like it was something I was proud of and enjoyed. So when I get to the end and I reread through it, I go, hey, that's pretty good. I like that.
Well, we have a fair number of listeners who are aspiring authors. Do you have advice for them besides keep going, which it sounds like you're good at that?
Well, it's a cliche, but it's a cliche for a reason. One of the things I do when I go to writers' conferences, I used to run Pitch Fest at the Thriller Fest Writers Conference. I did that for 3 or 4 years, and that's where writers can come in and pitch agents and editors their ideas, and it's sort of a verbal query process. And I would be very disappointed when I would see authors come in with the same book year after year, and they keep trying to pitch it, because in a commercial genre like thrillers, which I am in, if you want a career in this, you're going to have to do a book a year. That's what they're going to want. I mean, certainly if you have the one book that you just want to write and that's the only book you're ever going to write, sure, keep coming year after year with that book until you can get it published. But if you're going to be a commercial author, you might as well get practice now writing a book every year, because that's what you're going to have to do in your job. But if you write a book that takes you 5 years, and you get it published, the publisher is going to say, okay, what book are we doing for next year? Because that's what you got to do. And if you go, I'm going to take another 5 years to write the next book, you're going to have a tough time making a career out of this. And so what I tell people is, come to Pitch Fest, pitch that book. If you have no luck, okay, keep it around, keep it on your computer, don't delete it. Go write the next book. When you come back here a year later, pitch that book. And the example I give is, I didn't get published till my 3rd book, but I had written 2 other books. When that 3rd book got published, they wanted, well, what else do you have? And I said, I had these 2 other books that are unpublished. And by the way, Karen knows that I self-published all 3 of those books back in 2009, because I thought they were all worth reading. And so when the ARC got published, they went back and published the other 2 books that I had already. And so it wasn't wasted effort writing those books. One, it was helping me hone my craft. And 2, I eventually made money from those books. So it wasn't wasted in any sense of the word. And so Steve Barry wrote 8 books before he got published. But when he did, he became a bestseller, and he started using scenes from all of those books he had already written. He didn't necessarily publish them outright, but he reused a lot of the work he had already done. And those books became bestsellers. So it was not wasted at all. And he got practice writing books. And so that's why he can do a book a year now. And so that's the biggest advice I'd tell people. I
have a friend who calls that repurposing. She said, yes. You can repurpose it for another book, or, and that's
absolutely.
Exactly, I found that to be true.
Is there a writing book on craft that you would recommend to aspiring authors?
Oh, there's a lot. I would recommend Stephen King's On Writing. And Stein on Writing is also one of the first ones I read, and I really like it. The author is Saul Stein, S-O-L, that I thought was very good. And reading books about your genre too. If you like literary fiction, writing literary fiction, read books about writing literary fiction. If you like writing thrillers, read books about writing thrillers. And then the other thing I would say is I went to writers' conferences very early in my career, long before I was ever even had an agent. I think I'm the only person who's been to every single Thriller Fest conference from beginning to end who wasn't a published author when they started, because I knew it was very important to not only learning the craft from all the seminars and panels from actual authors, actual best-selling authors, but also meeting a lot of people and making great connections. And that's eventually how I found my agents and found people who became friends of mine and blurbed my books. It was just a great experience to have that connection with other writers, because this job is very lonely. And so it really re-energizes you when you go to a conference and see everybody else in the same position as you, and you can share stories about the business and really learn a lot. And so I would say reading books on writing is great. And if you can get to writing conferences, either in your local area, if it's a general writing conference, or going to writing conferences that are specific to your genre, I would highly recommend that.
Yeah, I've heard it said that writing is a solo activity, but publishing is a team sport.
Absolutely. There's so much you've got to think about when you're publishing. And that's the other recommendation is, Karen, you probably know this even better since you do a lot of self-publishing, that you have to wear a lot of hats. Creating and writing the book is just the first step. If you can't get the word out there about your book, if you can't distribute it so people can find the book, why does it matter what you've written? So you want to get the words that you've created into as many hands as possible so that people can read it. There's so many things you have to think about, whether you're self-published or with a publisher. You have to think about the cover and the book jacket copy and the copy editing and the page proofing and the marketing and publicity and how it's being distributed and myriad other things. So you've got to be able to wear that business person's hat as well. You can't just say, well, I've written it and it's up to everybody else to actually sell the book. I heard a good example the other day. If you're opening a pizza parlor and all you say is, well, I make great pizzas, I don't have to figure out, if I make a great pizza, people are going to come in. No, you've got to make a nice ambiance for your restaurant. You've got to do advertising to make people aware of your pizza. And you've got to have staff who are serving them and giving them a good experience. And so making the pizza is just the first and necessary step, but it's not the only step. And so the same is true with books.
And I always say, no one can read a book they don't know about.
Exactly. Obscurity is your biggest problem as an author. If they don't, and even if you've already published books, if I write my next book and it comes out, they may love me as an author, but if they don't know it exists, they're not going to read it. And so just getting the word out is a big problem that we're all trying to solve, and also getting attention. And that's the other thing relating to what you said, Karen, about starting the books off fast, is I consider my competition is not other authors. If people are reading, they're already reading and my kind of genre, and hopefully they'll like what I do. But what our real competition is everything else out there. It's Facebook, it's Instagram, it's Fortnite, it's Netflix, it's Amazon Prime, it's shopping, it's whatever you can do on your device. If you're an e-reader and the book is not grabbing you, it takes a second to click over to doing something else. I can play a little Candy Crush on my phone just as easily as I can read a book. And so if you're not grabbing their attention and riveting them to what you're writing, it's super easy to move on to something else. And so that's another thing I keep in mind when I'm writing.
You know, I have long suspected that stylistically books have changed in the same way that if you watch old movies, their pacing is slower. Do you think that's the case, Boyd?
Oh, absolutely. Both books and movies. You do not have the luxury of setting a scene. I mean, sure, there are always exceptions for beautiful writing or well-known authors who can write whatever they want and people read them because they have dedicated fans. But if you're starting out and you are not grabbing the attention, now I know the thriller genre better than any other. So that's typically what I'm thinking. Maybe literary fiction is different or nonfiction, but for the thriller genre, you've got to grab their attention from the very get-go. And if you're not doing that, and if you look at thriller books from the past, it's a very different, more leisurely kind of intro. And I don't think you can get away with doing that now. It just, it's too easy to move on.
You'll lose readers.
And it's, yeah. And so the same thing. I mean, think about when you're watching something on Netflix. How easy is it if you're not engaged in something in the first 10 minutes? Oh, go back, find something else to watch. Yeah, it's super easy. And so you've got to keep their attention and continuing to keep their attention. I saw a great advice on a screenwriting class on YouTube, which was asking this acting or this script writing teacher asked his students, what is the purpose of a scene? And they would give him flowery response. Oh, it's to set the plot and tell people about the character and describe the setting. And he said, no, the purpose of a scene is to get people to read the next scene. That is the only purpose of a scene. And so I really take that to heart when I'm writing my books. If my scene that I'm writing doesn't make somebody want to read what's coming next, it's out of there. It doesn't have any purpose. I think that's definitely, as a thriller writer, you need to keep that in mind as you're writing. And as I said, I get bored easily. So if it's boring me, I know it's going to bore other people. And so,
well, I know my husband and I, when we watch a Netflix movie, we have a 15-minute rule. And if we're not engaged in the movie in 15 minutes, we're done.
Exactly. That's so different from going to a theater where you paid your $15, you're sitting in the theater. It has to be pretty bad for you to get up and walk out and go home. You've spent your money, your night out, you got the babysitter, you're dedicated. If you're watching at home on Netflix, I applaud you for giving it 15 minutes. I'm sure there's other people who say 5 minutes in, nope, not liking this. I'm going to move on, because there is more stuff on Netflix and all the other streaming networks than you could watch in a lifetime. And so there is no doubt that you can move on to the next thing in a second. And so you've got to make it so that people can't turn it on. Well, I got to watch what happens next. I can't turn it off now. That's what you've got to be thinking as an author too.
All right. Do you have an ideal reader in mind when you write? Like, do you write for someone? Like, for example, Stephen King writes for his wife, as you know, from the On Writing book.
I'm definitely with Stephen King. My wife is my first audience. Everything that I write, she sees first, and often we'll do a revision before any other person reads it. So if I can keep, and she's a harsh critic, so if I can keep her entertained, then I know I'm on the right track. I don't know if I think of her as my reader when I'm writing, but I know if she reads it and says it needs work, it's not right yet, then I will go back and absolutely rewrite it.
When you're writing your books, what is your why? What are you hoping readers will take from reading a Boyd Morrison novel?
First and foremost, I want them to be entertained. I want them to not be able to stop reading. And thankfully, I have, if you look at online reviews of my books, one of the common refrains is that it's hard to put down. And that's exactly what I want. I want somebody to not be able to put this book down. Sometimes we as writers downplay that in its importance and say, oh, we're just do frivolous stuff. It's just entertainment. Think about the last year. What has kept us sane? It's the entertainment options we've had. No wonder book sales did not crater last year. People needed something to take them away, to escape. And that's what I write. I write escapism. I want people to not think about the bad things that are going on in their lives, and get some resolution in a story when maybe they don't get resolution in their lives. And the other thing is, I do like to inspire people. That's not the goal, but it's so gratifying when that does happen. For example, I wrote a book called Rogue Wave, and the protagonist of that story is a geophysicist who works at the Tsunami Warning Center in Hawaii. And I had a woman write to me that her son was graduating from high school and she wanted a signed book of Rogue Wave because her son, because of that book, decided he was going to go to college and major in geophysics because he loved that so much. And man, that really hit me. Wow, I wrote a book that inspired somebody's career. That is amazing. And then other things I've seen, one of the other ones that really, there have been a number that really touched me. One was somebody wrote that they often shared books with his uncle who was older. And that's what they liked to do together. They would read a book and then they would talk about it. And he said when his uncle was in the hospital, the last book they read together was The Vault. And so that book will always mean something to him because that was the last book that he got to share with his uncle. And so, it's those kinds of things that make you realize there is more meaning to what we do than maybe sometimes we realize. And so I hope people who write books don't ever downplay the significance of what they do, because if they entertain people, if they inspire people, that can be just as meaningful as any other job you can do. So it's really gratifying when I hear something like that.
All right. So to wrap things up, we always like to do these fun extra questions. We copied the Actors Studio, which I'm sure you're familiar with. Mm-hmm. Yeah. What is one food that will never get past your lips?
Licorice, black licorice. I cannot.
Black licorice.
Black licorice. I can't even stand the smell of it. It just.
My husband's like that too. That's sick. Funny.
Oh, yeah.
Who would you want to play you in a movie?
Oh, Hugh Jackman. I don't know how much resemblance is there, but he's such a great guy, and I think he's close to my age, so I think it would be a good match. Yeah, he would be great. And I like that he has a sense of humor too. If he could also play the Tyler Locke in my stories, he would have been perfect.
Oh, I hope Netflix is listening.
Yeah. Me too. Yeah, he's perfect. Yeah, I love him too. What superpower would you pick given the opportunity?
Oh, the ability to fly. I would absolutely love that. Of course, you have to think. See, this is the engineer in me that I would have to think about. Okay, would I be able to breathe if I'm going up to? Superman can do anything, but if you said the only thing I could do is fly, if I'm flying at 600 miles an hour, do I get birds and bugs in my face, and what happens then? And so it's the engineer in me that can't turn off thinking about all that other stuff. But if I could fly with impunity without any problems, I would love to do that.
Well, you would be able to because you would have the magic suit, which would deflect all of those things.
If I were the
you would
Iron
still
Man
be good.
Suit, I would
Iron Man.
Yeah. At the end of your life, what do you hope you'll have accomplished?
That I've been a good friend and family member, and that I've provided some entertainment to people.
What is the worst job you've ever had?
Oh, cleaning out pet cages in a pet store. It was awful. It was in the back room where there were roaches and all kind of bugs, and it smelled terrible. I lasted one day in that job and said, no, thank you. I love animals. I love pets. I love my dog, but I could not do that job. It was awful.
If you could instantly become an expert at something, what would it be?
It would be at foreign languages. I would love to be fluent in multiple languages. That seems like a superpower to me. I've been trying to learn some languages, and I can actually understand a few things in some of them, but to be fluent in them, I have a friend who can speak about 14 or 15 languages, and he just has an ear for it. And I would just love that. He gives tours in Croatian and Slovakian and lots of other languages, and that would just be really cool to just be plopped down in France and suddenly be fluent and be able to walk around and talk to everybody. That would be cool.
What's your favorite scent?
My favorite scent? Maybe freshly mown grass. That's one a lot of people say, but it's just such a pleasant spring-like smell and signifies newness and rebirth. And yeah, I like that.
What is the most terrifying thing you've ever done?
One of them was fairly recent. I went to the Las Vegas Motor Speedway and drove an Indy car around the track at 154 miles an hour. I was pretty scared because you're literally about 4 inches off the ground. And I was all alone in the car driving around this track. And it wasn't even as close to as fast as these cars really can go, because I think they go 225 miles an hour at full speed. But my attention was riveted to the road and I was shaking by the time I got out of there. So it was pretty scary.
When people pronounce words incorrectly, do you let them know?
I want to. It really gets me when I hear that. Maybe earlier in my life I did, when I was much more insufferable. Hopefully I've restrained myself now that if it's not important, I let it go. If there is some reason that I absolutely have to point it out, I will. Yeah, that really gnaws at me that I can't do it.
If you could live your life over again, would you?
Live it over, knowing what I know now? No, I don't think so. I think my life would totally change then, because everything I know now would change how I do things. And so maybe I would have ended up in a worse place. That I'm pretty happy where I am. So I wouldn't, it would probably screw me up to go back. And so, no, I don't think so.
Well, thank you so much for being here with us. This is such a treat to have you.
Thank you. This was a lot of fun.
Take care, Boyd.
Okay, you too.
Thank you for listening to Behind the Book, brought to you by authors Tess Thompson and Karen McQuestion. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and post a question in the comment section. This has been Behind the Book.